This is March 6th. 2026, Day 7 of Operation Epic Fury. US Central Command confirmed overnight that strike operations against Iran's remaining ballistic missile infrastructure continued through the night without pause. 3 additional mobile TEL launchers, transporter erector launchers, the trucks that set up and fire Iran's ballistic missiles, were destroyed in the Zagros mountain range in a coordinated F-35 and B-2 strike package. The hunt for Iran's surviving launch capacity continues around the clock. In the Persian Gulf, CENTCOM issued a single-line status update that said more than any press conference could. Quote, "No Iranian naval vessels remain operational in the Gulf of Oman, the Strait of Hormuz, or the Arabian Gulf." End quote. That sentence describes something that has not been true at any point in the last 4 decades. Iran's navy, the one it spent 40 years rebuilding and redesigning specifically to fight the United States, does not exist anymore as a functional fighting force. Iran's drone and missile launch rate continued its downward trajectory. In the first 48 hours of the conflict, Iran launched over 400 ballistic missiles and nearly 1,000 drones across 7 countries. That rate has dropped by more than 80%. The stockpile is finite. The production lines are being struck. The resupply corridor is closed. In Tehran, the Interim Leadership Council held its 4th consecutive emergency session. No statement was issued. Ahmad Vahidi, the newly appointed IRGC commander, appeared briefly on state television to declare that the resistance continues with full strength. Behind him, the production studio looked different from last week. Smaller, less polished. The kind of detail you notice when you're paying attention. Marco Rubio spoke to reporters on March 5th. His message was simple. What Iran has experienced so far, he said, is not the peak of this operation. Quote, "The hardest hits are yet to come from the US military." He was not specifying a timeline. He did not need to. Oil markets opened Monday and moved exactly as the models predicted. Brent crude crossed $97 a barrel before the first hour of trading closed. The Strait of Hormuz transit volume, which was running at full capacity 9 days ago, is now at approximately 20% of normal. Insurance premiums for vessels attempting to transit have risen 400%. This is where we are on March 6th. Now let's go back to understand how we got here. On April 18th, 1988, the United States launched Operation Praying Mantis. In a matter of hours, American forces destroyed 2 Iranian oil platforms, a missile boat, 2 frigates, and 3 armed speedboats. Half of Iran's operational navy was crippled in a single day. It was the worst single blow delivered to an Iranian naval force since the First Persian Empire, a naval tradition stretching back more than 2,500 years. Iran's admirals remembered, Iran's strategists rebuilt, and for the next 4 decades, the Islamic Republic dedicated itself to making sure that what happened on April 18th, 1988 would never happen again. They had a plan. A serious one, 3 layers deep. Layer 1, fast attack boats, hundreds of small, fast, hard-to-hit vessels that could swarm American warships in the confined waters of the Strait of Hormuz, a 21-mile wide choke point where America's large surface combatants would struggle to maneuver and become vulnerable to massed, close-range fire. Layer 2, land-based anti-ship missiles positioned along Iran's coastline, capable of reaching any vessel attempting to transit the strait. Layer 3, submarines. Small, quiet, designed to ambush American ships from below. Together, these 3 elements formed a layered asymmetric doctrine built around a single core assumption. The United States would try to come in close like it did in 1988. And when it did, Iran would be ready. It was a perfect doctrine for the wrong war, because the United States never intended to come in close. Iran's fast attack boats were waiting in port. Iran's submarine crews were on standby. Iran's missile batteries were watching the horizon for American warships. The doctrine was ready. All Iran needed was for the enemy to show up in the way the doctrine expected. What showed up instead was a tomahawk, then another, then another. From distances of 1,600 kilometers, nearly 1,000 miles, Arleigh Burke-class destroyers that Iran had been expecting to fight at close range in the Strait of Hormuz were instead standing far out in the Arabian Sea and the Red Sea, methodically releasing cruise missiles that flew low, navigated terrain, and arrived at their targets before Iranian radar operators could formulate a coherent defensive response. The Iris Makran was the first major casualty. At 120,000 tons displacement, it was among the largest vessels in the entire Middle East region. It had started life as a commercial oil tanker. Iran converted it into a military vessel capable of supporting helicopter operations and serving as a forward-based ship, a mobile support platform for extended naval operations far from Iranian ports. It was moored at Bandar Abbas when the Tomahawks arrived. Multiple strikes in rapid succession. Whatever defensive systems the Makran carried had no time to engage. Satellite photographs captured by Planet Labs show what remained. Fires at the berth, thick black smoke streaming from the ship's central section. The Iris Shahid Bagheri was next. This one mattered more. Iran's naval commanders had been using the Shahid Bagheri, a converted commercial vessel repurposed for launching drones and retrieving helicopters, as a mobile drone platform since the first hours of the conflict. Positioned outside the range of land-based defenses, it had been launching UAVs at US bases and Gulf state installations while operating under the assumption that its mobility made it difficult to target. The Tomahawks found it anyway. Iran's closest equivalent to an aircraft carrier has not launched a drone since. No, I guess you could say it's the first aircraft carrier sunk since World War II, one analyst noted wryly. That description slightly overstates the Shahid Bagheri's capabilities, but it understates the psychological impact of losing it. A Jamaran-class corvette at Chabahar, IRGC fast attack boat pens across 3 separate facilities, submarine berths at Bandar Abbas, the list continued. Satellite imagery over the port of Bandar Abbas, where at least 11 Iranian warships were confirmed present as recently as February 22nd, showed the region blanketed in a dense layer of black smoke following the American strike packages. And then, when the Tomahawks had done their work and Iran's ships were already burning and listing, the F-35s arrived. Precision JDAM delivery, clean up what the cruise missiles had struck but not finished. The stealth aircraft finished. Iran's doctrine had prepared for a naval battle. What it received was a demolition operation conducted entirely outside the range of anything Iran had positioned to defend against it. US Central Command posted a single statement on the platform formerly known as Twitter. It read, 2 days ago, the Iranian regime had 11 ships in the Gulf of Oman. Today, they have 0. The Iranian regime has harassed and attacked international shipping in the Gulf of Oman for decades. Those days are over. Read that last sentence again. Those days are over. That is not operational language. That is a declaration of strategic outcome. CENTCOM is not saying Iran's navy has been temporarily degraded. It is saying the entire paradigm of Iranian naval harassment, 4 decades of fast boats, mine-laying, tanker seizures and Hormuz brinkmanship, has been permanently ended as an instrument of Iranian leverage. Iran's IRGC Admiral Ali Shamkhani did not survive to dispute this assessment. He was killed in an Israeli airstrike at the naval headquarters in Bandar Abbas, while the port itself was being simultaneously struck by US forces. One of Iran's most senior naval commanders, dead, the headquarters of Iran's naval fleet, devastated. 11 warships gone in 48 hours. Donald Trump, speaking on March 3rd, did not use operational language either. He said, they have no navy, it's been knocked out. 7 words. 40 years of Iranian naval doctrine answered in 7 words. Here is something that might seem counterintuitive. The United States did not destroy Iran's navy because Iran's navy was a serious military threat to American forces. It wasn't. Iran's fleet, even at full strength, was never going to threaten a US carrier strike group in open water. The technological gap is not a gap, it's a canyon. Dr. Andreas Böhm, a Middle East specialist at the University of St. Gallen in Switzerland, put it directly. If you compare their navy with Donald Trump's big, beautiful armada, it's more like a dwarf. He added that Iranian materiel is outdated, heavily degraded by decades of sanctions, and the Air Force still relies largely on American-built aircraft purchased before 1979, airframes that were already aging when Khomeini came to power. So, if Iran's navy wasn't a conventional military threat, why did the United States move so fast and so comprehensively to destroy it? One word: Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. Through those 21 miles passes approximately 20% of the world's daily crude oil supply. Japan receives 80% of its crude imports through this choke point. South Korea, 68%. China, nearly 46% of all the oil it consumes. The entire global energy architecture of the Indo-Pacific runs through a waterway that two mid-sized cities would fit across. Iran cannot win this war militarily. It knows that. But Iran calculated that it did not need to win militarily to achieve its strategic objective. It only needed to keep the strait functionally closed long enough to generate the kind of global economic pain, rising oil prices, supply anxiety in Tokyo and Seoul and Beijing, political pressure on Washington from its most critical Asian allies that would force the United States into a negotiation it didn't want, on a timeline Iran could exploit. Ebrahim Jabari, a senior IRGC advisor, made the threat explicit on March 2nd. "The strait is closed," he declared. "If anyone tries to pass, the heroes of the Revolutionary Guard and the regular Navy will set those ships ablaze." He added that Iran would begin targeting oil pipelines within days and that crude prices would reach $200 per barrel. That was the leverage. The Navy was the instrument of that leverage. Fast attack boats don't need to sink American carriers. They only need to make commercial ship captains, and insurance underwriters believe that the strait is too dangerous to transit, which for a period they did. Strait transit volume dropped by roughly 80% in the first days of the conflict. The economic pressure was real. The US destroyed the Navy to eliminate the instrument without fast attack boats, without submarine coverage, without drone-launching motherships. Iran cannot credibly threaten vessels attempting to transit. The declaration that no Iranian naval assets remain operational in the Strait, the Gulf of Oman, or the Arabian Gulf is not just a military statement, it is an economic statement. It tells the ship captain in Rotterdam and the insurance underwriter in London that the threat environment has changed. The strait is not fully open yet. Mine-clearing operations are ongoing. Iran's land-based anti-ship missiles along the coast remain a factor. The threat is not zero, but the centerpiece of Iran's asymmetric naval strategy, the swarming fast boats, the submarine ambush capability, the mobile drone platforms, is gone. Iranian admirals of a certain age are experiencing something uncomfortable right now. They've been here before. They watched 1988 happen, and they spent their entire careers making sure it would never happen again. They failed. And what just happened to Iran's navy makes 1988 look, in the words of one analyst, like a picnic. But here is what makes the 2026 destruction categorically different from Operation Praying Mantis. In 1988, the United States fought Iran's navy the way Iran expected to be fought: ships against ships, in proximity, in contested waters. Iran lost badly, but it lost in a fight it had prepared for. The doctrine it built afterward made sense given what happened. In 2026, the United States never entered the fight Iran had prepared for. Tomahawks launched from 1,000 miles away do not care about fast attack boat swarms. They do not interact with submarine ambush patterns. They are not affected by anti-ship missiles positioned to hit vessels that never came within range. Every tactical layer Iran built to defend against a praying mantis-style engagement was built to counter a threat that did not show up. Iran brought a doctrine to a technology fight. The technology won before the doctrine could even deploy. And the follow-up, F-35s finishing what cruise missiles started, completed the picture. Iran's asymmetric naval doctrine assumed that if it could just survive the initial American strike and get its fast boats into the fight, the numbers and the geography would give it a chance. The doctrine never modeled a scenario where the initial American strike was comprehensive enough to prevent any Iranian vessel from ever getting into position to use its doctrine at all. That is what happened. The entire premise of 40 years of Iranian naval planning, we will absorb the first blow and respond asymmetrically, was invalidated by a first blow large enough that there was no asymmetric response capacity left to deploy. Iran launched approximately 400 ballistic missiles and 1,000 drones across the first several days of this conflict. That sounds like a lot. It is not relative to what Iran launched in the aftermath of Operation Midnight Hammer in the summer of 2025, the US-Israeli operation that destroyed much of Iran's nuclear infrastructure. Iran's initial response capacity was already degraded going into February 28th. What we are seeing now is a further degraded version of a force that had already been partially exhausted. The launch rate is declining, the stockpile is finite, the resupply corridor is closed, Russia is not answering, China is observing, and Marco Rubio says the hardest hits are yet to come. Iran's regime knows this. The propaganda output, fake Abraham Lincoln strikes, AI-generated carrier destruction videos, claims of hundreds of American casualties, is the output of an institution that has run out of real victories to announce and is now manufacturing them for a domestic audience that is watching the smoke columns over Bandar Abbas and asking questions. Iran's naval doctrine failed because it was designed for a fight the United States refused to have. Iran's propaganda is failing because the gap between what it claims and what satellite photographs show has become impossible to paper over. Iran's leverage, the Strait, the energy threat, the global economic pressure campaign is diminishing as the naval capacity that enabled it gets removed from the map, one tomahawk at a time. The regime that Khamenei built is not collapsing in a single dramatic moment. It is degrading systematically. Each day, fewer missiles. Each day, fewer ships. Each day, fewer options. Each day, the distance between what Vahidi can threaten and what he can actually deliver grows wider. Deep in Moscow, Vladimir Putin is watching this with increasing attention. The collapse of Iran as a functioning regional power removes a critical piece of Russia's strategic distraction architecture, the capacity to tie down American military attention and resources in the Middle East while Russia operates in Eastern Europe. Iran's degradation is not neutral for Moscow, but that is a separate story. For now, the Gulf of Oman is empty. The Bandar Abbas satellite photographs show smoke and wreckage where a fleet used to be. CENTCOM is running strike packages around the clock, and the President of the United States summed up 40 years of Iranian naval planning in 7 words. They have no navy. It's been knocked out. The radar operator drinking tea on the Gulf Coast had 39 minutes of peace before the first Tomahawk arrived. He has been watching the smoke rise over Bandar Abbas ever since. The whole world is watching, and the clock is still running.